the House will be in order. On page 3 of the calendar, under the order of House Bill second reading, there appears House Bill 4141. Mr. Clerk, please read the bill.
House Bill 4141, Bill 9, making appropriations. This bill was read second on previous day. Floor number 1 lost previously. Floor number 2 is offered by Representative Greg Harris and has been approved for consideration.
Mr. Harris on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I proceed with this, specific amendment, there are a couple general comments that I would like to make that would be applicable to all the amendments which we're about to hear. We had an amendment before us, amendment number 1 to this bill, which was not successful, and we know we have to begin to put together now amendments that can pass with 60 votes in the House and 30 votes in the Senate and go on to the government. We also know that in our current budget situation, we have to look at the fiscal reality of the state, and that is that we cannot balance the budget simply with cuts nor with revenue, in my opinion. That we will need to find both a combination of reasonable cuts that do not unfairly balance the budget on the backs of those who are the most frail and vulnerable, and also look at appropriate revenue and expenses across all of our silos. So in the overall package that I'm going to present today, there are over $50 million worth of reductions over the FY15 post-supplemental budget. So that's about 1.8% in cuts on top of the 2.25% cuts to these items taken as a whole that we have already approved. So these items are going down. We are cutting expenses. We are also being very careful not to try to pass into appropriations those things that we know would have problems being enacted because they do not have statutory authority issues, might run into maintenance of effort problems with the federal government, or other impediments to them being real savings and real changes that we can count on. So this is applicable to all these items. And what these items have in common, though, is these are things that, as we have listened for 11 weeks to literally hundreds of hours of testimony from people from every corner of this state, we have found that the people of Illinois value. These are things that people in this state value. They value good treatment of senior citizens. They value early intervention and being sure that our young people have, in their 0 through 3 years, the best opportunities at life. They value child care for working parents so that families can go to work and know that their young people are safe and out of harm's way. We value mental health and substance abuse treatment in our communities to keep our streets safe and to improve family life and to strengthen both our families and our communities. We value providing services to people with autism. We value providing support to those who are homeless. We have a responsibility as a state to those young people who, through no fault of their own, have become our wards. Those young people who are 18 to 21, who in the previous proposal would have been abandoned by us, literally, as their parents and left to their own devices, that we have a responsibility to them. We have a responsibility to women who may be suffering from breast cancer to be sure that they are appropriately detected and treated in a rapid fashion before that disease spreads. These are things we all value, and these are things that are valued both by people on both sides of the aisle from across the state of Illinois. We are trying to do a responsible thing by being sure that some of these priorities are funded. We are bringing lines down because we realize that we have to live within our means, and that only through a process by which we agree on cuts and I would hope some revenues can we solve this problem. So that being said, which is applicable to all these lines, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to talk about the amendment number 2 that is before us, which deals with the community care program in the Department of Aging. The community care program, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is the program that allows our seniors to age in place, to stay in their own homes. It provides homemaker services, housekeeping services for a couple hours a week to senior citizens so that they are able to stay in their own homes, live independently, have full, complete lives, still be involved with their families, with their churches or synagogues or mosques, with the local community. And it also does another thing. It keeps them out of the much higher kind of care that is provided, a higher cost kind of care that is provided in nursing homes and institutions. So that we know that by keeping people living independently within their own homes, that we save the state money, we make people's lives better. And also I would point out that we are under court decree because of the Olmstead decision to move more people from institutions who are currently there into the community, and this funding line would allow those things to happen. So I would appreciate, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Leader Durkin.
Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
Representative Harris, it's May 6th. Why are we doing this right now?
Because the clock is ticking and we need to begin every journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. We're taking one step today, Leader.
I have great admiration for you, Greg, and I know you personally. You're a fine man. I'm not going to repeat what I said earlier today, but we've got a lot of time left. We've got 3 weeks to work on a reasonable, fair budget. I don't need to go too far in the past, but I do believe that's what's going on right now is form over substance, and it's unfortunate. This is about mail pieces, trying to string people out. And I hope that's not your intention, Representative, but the fact is that it's becoming more and more apparent about how this process is going. Again, it was the Speaker who stated that it's about time Republicans participate, get back into the game, but the fact is when we've had no hearing on this specific amendment, I think it does ring some sort of cynicism, not only with the people on this side of the aisle, but also through the people of the state of Illinois, who sent a new governor here to the state of Illinois with not just Republican votes, but independent and Democrat votes to get things right, but also to do things in a bipartisan, fair manner. And we're not doing that today.
Mr. Sandak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. An inquiry of the chair first, and then I'd like to ask a few questions
State
of the sponsor.
inquiry, sir.
Is there a way we could combine amendments 2 through 16, I believe, on one vote?
The answer is no.
Shocking. Thank you. A
Sponsor
question.
yields.
Thank you. Representative, obviously, these amendments were filed this morning, correct?
Yes.
What time were they filed at, sir?
I would defer to the clerk to tell me. I don't know off the top of my head.
Did you file them?
They all bear my signature and they were all filed today. I did not look at the clock.
Okay, and with respect to Amendment 2, it was filed this morning, and how many pages is that amendment?
It is 2.
How many readings has this been in front of the committee, your committee?
The subject matter has been debated, like I said, for about 11 weeks over and over again. I think you would be correct in saying that 2-page document had not gone before the committee.
It has not gone before the committee.
It is a floor amendment.
Thank
By
you.
its nature, it came to the floor.
You recited and you gave credence to both Republicans and Democrats over a whole set of values, things that good people, people of conscience and heart would value. But good people of Illinois also value some process, some transparency. And do you think this is good process, filing an amendment today? An appropriations bill, by the way. We haven't even set a revenue number yet.
Well, if this was a brand new program that had just come upon the state, you might have a point, Representative, but the fact of the matter is this is a program that became an entitlement to the people of the state of Illinois in a consent decree that was signed by Governor Jim Thompson, who was a member of your party many years ago. So in all these years, this is a program that's existed. We know how it works. We know what the dynamics
Greg,
are.
I respect the
and
program and the substance. I'm talking about process right now.
I'm answering your question. That if this was a program that nobody knew how it worked or how it functioned, it would probably take a lot longer to determine what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. But we have decades of history with it.
Wait a minute. Are you suggesting this is good budget process for each and every instance of state government because it's been in existence for decades?
I would say that there is no process that is good for each and every instance of anything, but I think this is an appropriate process for this particular legislation.
And I suspect you'll say that for the subsequent 15 amendments as well, yes?
I think so.
Even though some are newer programs than others, irrespective of their entrenchment in state government and how many years, whether it was Thompson, Edgar, Ryan, that guy after him of your party or otherwise, this is good process?
I'm sorry, Representative. Could you repeat your question?
No, it's okay, I'll move on. Do you know if Speaker Madigan intends to vote in favor of your bill, your amendment?
I have not asked him nor other members how they intend to vote.
Generally, we do a little roll call before a guy like you, a good a veteran legislator, putting a bill out there that hasn't done a roll call of his leader, the Speaker of the House, doesn't know how the Speaker is going to vote on your bill?
Yeah, again, I will put this out. This is certainly the most public venue in which to discuss anything we do. Everything we hear say will be heard today by the people in this room, by the people watching, by the people recording it. This is the most transparent process we can have. And then we will
it really isn't. It really isn't the most transparent process.
And then we will see how each person votes.
To the amendment, Mr. Speaker, that was a bridge too far for this gentleman to actually throw out there without the audible groan from this side of the aisle. I'm going to suggest my colleagues watch the board very carefully because on the last amendment, Amendment number 1 to House Bill 4141, the Speaker of this chamber voted, well, actually he didn't vote. He proposed something and didn't vote on it. Yet we're being asked to address on the merits for the first time without a committee and something that was put in on the floor today, an appropriations bill of importance, something we all value. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an absolute sham, carrying over from yesterday's sham. It is embarrassing to me, to all of us here, that we're wasting our time and energy in such a form. Leader Durkin yesterday spoke about substance over form, working in a bipartisan manner, actually being collegial and cooperative. It is a shame that this is what we're doing, these show votes, these political gamesmanship. I think we're all a little lesser for it, because this bill deserves the real process. We need to have a revenue number. We need to have, what are we really going to budget? And then it needs to be vetted at the committee in the real way, not a subject matter show trial either. I'm going to suggest my colleagues vote present and then watch that board because it may be instructive. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the sponsor yield.
Sponsor yields.
Representative, technically, the numbers involved with this amendment, how do the numbers compare from the FY15 that we passed under 317 compared to the governor's introduced FY16 budget?
Okay, I can tell you that FY15 pre-supplemental, there are 3 lines. Would you like me to read through them?
Just, do you have the ballpark numbers?
It's about level. It's about level for this particular program, but that's a little deceptive when you look at the numbers, because this program also has, as the baby boomers get older, and we now know that, between now and 2020, is when the baby boom will become senior citizens. Each year, the number of people utilizing this program increases substantially. In out years, this is where we really need to control liability. So while the number stays level, the demand for the services has actually increased. So
how does this compare to the governor's introduced budget, though?
To the governor's introduced budget? Let me just add up the different things here. It appears to be, pardon?
I'm with you.
It's over the governor's budget by about 90 million.
It's over the governor's budget by $9 million. Are you sure about that? Can you have your guys check real quickly? Mm-hmm. Or maybe this should have been done before we came to the floor, maybe rushed a little bit. So you're gonna vote on a bill that you can't tell me whether it's cut, as you said, or over, and your staff doesn't know that answer either. Is that what I'm looking at right now?
Yeah, they're saying it is exactly about $90 million over.
So it's about $90 million over. Mm-hmm. Now, we have something else,
yeah,
but only because we were given it about an hour ago, and so we're trying to check into it. That's why we're asking the questions. It might be a long time today because we don't have all the information because we weren't actually brought into the process.
Okay.
So if
well,
you just
I'll
give me a second here while I confer with my guys. I only have one, though. You got two guys working with you? I got one, so it might take a little longer. Hang on.
Okay.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Please excuse Representative David Harris for the remainder of the day.
I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry, sir. We'll excuse Mr. Harris and Mr. Sullivan. I saw you walk away. I apologize, sir.
No, I said I'm conferring with my one staffer as opposed to his two staffers, so just give me
You want one of them?
Mm-hmm. I would actually just like to see the budget that we're voting on more than an hour in advance. That's what I would like. Okay, we're going to continue to look at our documents that we got an hour ago, and we might have some further questions. Thank you.
Now that's it, sir? Mr. Kay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the sponsor yield.
Sponsor yields.
Greg, I noticed that you opened your comments today with a real familiar adage, so I'm going to see if you have ever heard of this one before. If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. Have you ever heard of that one?
I've heard a lot of really good sayings.
Yeah. Well, that seems to be what we're doing here today because you really don't know where you're trying to go. And I'm going to begin by asking and proving my point by asking you where you think you're going to find the money to pay for what you want to do.
Could you repeat your question?
I'm sorry. Where are you going to find the money to pay for what you want to do here today?
Well, I would tell you, Representative, that there are really a couple different ways to go about budgeting. One is from the top down, and the other, I read a very interesting article in the paper this weekend. One of our colleagues from North Barrington, Illinois, was talking about zero-based budgeting, where you start the budget and you build it from the bottom up, and that is sort of this process.
Well, we're certainly building from the bottom up. There's no doubt about that. But I want to know today where you're going to find the money to pass this set of amendments, because this isn't zero-based.
The revenue that exists within the state, if you look at the COG for Gombe numbers, is certainly inclusive of the amounts that would be represented by the total 16 amendments.
So with respect to the amendments, or this amendment at least, it's fair to say that you and I sit on an appropriations committee together, correct? And you mentioned that we had met, what, 11 days or 11 times?
I think it was 11 weeks.
Which one of those 11 days did we reach consensus as to any one of the amendments that you have run out today for consideration?
These are being brought out on the floor today for the full body to consider.
That's not my question. Which day of the 11 did we reach consensus on these spending items that you have brought before us today?
Yeah, I remember in other years where things have gone through committee, came to the floor, there was not always consensus, and people vote their districts and vote their consciences. So, the outcome I don't think is going to be largely different.
In other words, you really totally left one side of the aisle out of the equation and just decided to run these amendments on your own.
We had a proposal that was sponsored by the governor earlier. We looked at that, and I think if that had just been left there, people would say, why aren't you guys proposing something new? This is another proposal, and I would put it up. I would ask for your support.
So the last two questions you haven't answered, but I'm assuming that you don't value input from the other party. You don't value the ideas of the other party. You don't value the time we spent in that committee, because 11 days I sat there with you and never once did you say any one of these items should be up for consideration as a final line item. Never once. What's wrong with the process?
I think that in all the meetings, people said they supported the concepts of, continuing our CCP programs and early intervention. I don't think that's a mystery.
Well, I thought when we started out this year that there was a sincere desire to fix the state of Illinois. And I certainly think the adage that I referred to before is truer than ever. We have no idea where we're going, and we're taking every road we possibly can to get there. And that's exactly the peril that you leave this state in. And it's on you, Greg. It's on you.
Representative Belloc.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
So I just wanted to ask you, Representative Harris, that we have worked together a lot on the last year and the last couple of years on the budget process. And I really thought that we were going, after, I think it was yesterday, we were back in the working groups. I thought the plan wasn't the plan to have another meeting and to start going over line by line so that we could work together on this?
And also, we've been working on these same things. We've been going through these same concepts, these same programs, for a number of weeks, Representative.
Well, I know, and we have participated in that. In fact, I was trying to go over, I think we probably sat through probably 16 to 18 hours of testimony from the advocates, and we have tried to be active participants in that process, starting up in Chicago and then coming down. So I guess my point is that we wanted to work with you on this, and then all of a sudden we get this big bill because and I know this doesn't pertain to this amendment, but I know all of us cared, especially on the group. I mean, we all cared about all the advocates, but the 18 to 21-year-olds, and we had talked about that last week. And I just talked with Director Sheldon's people that he's gone back to Washington twice now to look on the funding for that. So that's why I was looking forward, and a lot of people, of getting back together in the final process and working line by line in getting to where we were on the budget in order to see if some of those numbers might move a little bit as to what we could fund and shift a little bit, which is usually what we do, isn't it?
Yeah. And I would say that as we look at not only DCFS, but other programs in DHS, mental health, substance abuse, I think that one thing has become clear that we probably have left federal match on the table. That has come up over and over again in the hours of discussions regarding the budget that you mentioned. But until we get those bills drafted, until they are signed into law, until the feds have signed off on, we can't account for that revenue now. It's revenue that does not exist. So I really hope we can continue to work toward those, because I think we need to bring in every dollar of federal money that has been left on the table, if there is any out there, particularly for DCFS, mental health and substance abuse services.
Well, I guess my point was to that is that all of a sudden then we get a 125-page bill just brought up today, adding back in, I think, close to $850 million over what the governor's budget was, without any other discussion about that except to have it in front of us right now.
I think that the 125-page budget, was that not the governor's introduced budget?
Yes, but I'm just saying, we thought we were going to have more time to work on that in committee before we brought it out here and see what we all agreed on line by line in that budget. We took the time, and you did a good job. I respect you for all the work that you've done. We brought in all the agencies, and I feel that our side of the aisle, that we're very educated on a lot of the issues, but we were looking forward to going over at the end and looking where that money was, just like we talked about EI the other day. Certain things that were getting cut, that, what could we do about that? How could we work with that?
And again, we've spent many, many hours talking about that, and this is a proposal today to address some of those issues.
Well, to the bill, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to say that This year's budget, especially for human services, is filled with a lot of heart-wrenching decisions. And the governor has tried to look forward to how we can put our state back on track. And it is with that, with caution, that we've been looking over this budget, especially because this budget affects people's lives. But we also have to take into consideration that over the last several years, we have been downgraded over 22 times in our bond ratings. And we did the pension reform, and we did the Medicaid reform, and we still have $6 billion of unpaid bills. Those bills belong to providers, to nursing homes, to doctors, to private business people, to middle-class workers. That is who we owe that $6 billion to. And so in trying to come up with heart-wrenching decisions on this budget, we have tried to work through these decisions, and I think what we're ending up with here is the same thing. We are not going to have money to pay for these. Then we get into the borrowing and other things that we cannot put our state back on fiscal strong footing. And those are the concerns of everybody today in the state of Illinois as to how to get our state back on track, how we're going to pay our bills, how we are going to take care of the most fragile population in Illinois and be able to provide the services that we want to provide for them. And I think that we are not providing that now. Thank you.
Mr. Demmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
Mr. Chairman, I know we're both members of the Human Service Appropriation Committee. I'm not sure if I missed a day, but perhaps you could share with me what the vote was in committee on this amendment.
You guys all missed a day a couple weeks ago.
Is that when the vote was?
No, but yeah, there was a day. As we've said here before, this 2 lines, this 2 pages, as introduced, did not come before the committee. It came directly to the floor, and we have a chance to review it today.
When did you draft these bills?
We've been working for the last 11 weeks on listening to the same testimony, the same advocates.
But the number that you arrived at today, when did you arrive at that number?
In the last couple of days. I've been thinking about it, and we came to that conclusion.
So we held, as Representative before me said, we held many hours of testimony and heard from advocates on the governor's proposed budget. I'm curious if you have been working on this alternate plan for so many weeks, working on an alternate proposal for so many weeks. Why did you not bring that before the committee to hear input from advocates on how that proposal might affect them?
Because we think it's important to move forward and say we're interested in funding vital services, but also reducing costs. We think those are 2 very important things.
So on the proposal that we're debating right now, is Floor Amendment 2, do you know how advocates feel this amendment would affect them?
I think that they would be generally supportive.
We think, but we haven't asked them. We haven't heard an open hearing. We've asked them to weigh in on the governor's proposal, but not on this one.
Our analysis shows support.
And when were they made aware of this? When were the advocates given these numbers?
I think our staff has been working with some of them to be sure in the last short time that they were found this acceptable.
And so never during that discussion did it arise that we might want to convene a committee, the Human Service Appropriation Committee, and as we've been doing with the governor's proposal, here in an open public forum with the idea of transparency in mind, to hear in that setting how the advocates feel this proposal will affect them?
I think the governor's meetings we're talking about are the ones where they're supposed to be behind closed doors. This is in full public view, and everyone in Illinois has a chance to watch and listen to the discussion. As
long as they can read it in 2 hours, right? As long as they can make it through millions of dollars in spending. My next question is the next several amendments, although they represent significant financial amounts, they don't represent the entirety of the appropriation that the Human Service Appropriation Committee will be responsible for. So as chairman of that committee, is it your intent to run the remainder of the Human Services budget through floor amendments, or will we convene again as a meeting of the Human Service Appropriation Committee?
I believe tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.
And so these were given special attention, but the rest of the budget will run through a different, more responsible process?
These are things that had general support within the committee, within the community of people who came in and testified for us. These are things I think broadly across the state of Illinois people are in support of.
Isn't one way to gauge whether they have general support in the committee to hold a vote in committee?
I think a better way would be to have all 118 members cast a vote on the floor.
Well, why do we have the committee process in the first place then?
To bring in testimony, to talk amongst each other, which we have done for 11 weeks.
Thank you. And to the amendment, I think the strength of the committee process was just admitted by the sponsor here, saying that that's an important step as we build responsible legislation to bring in people to the process, to hear their input on it, to have open discussions, not just discussions that apparently have been happening between one side of the aisle and advocates for up to 11 weeks. Without making that information public and without making that information available to the rest of us. This really is not a good process, and I really recommend that you consider how this process affects everything else that we have to work on going forward. Thank you.
Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the amendment, the people of Illinois, after 12 long years, are just in fatigue. Fatigue about the politics as usual. They want adults. They want adults on second, and they want adults running this place here. And this charade that you're doing today, seniors deserve better. People with autism deserve better. People with Alzheimer's deserve better. This is Chicago politics at its worst. You know it is. We know it is. I'm not done. People of Illinois deserve better than what this chamber is giving them. Representative, you deserve. We deserve better. This is horrible politics. It's not fair to seniors. It's not fair to people with Alzheimer's. It's not fair with people with autism. It's not fair for people with disabilities. I'm mad. I'm disappointed. We deserve better. We, meaning the people of the state, deserve better. Shame on you.
Mr. Eunice. Excuse me, Mr. Harris is recognized.
So those folks who wanted to cast a vote to eliminate the Alzheimer's program, to eliminate the autism program, had your chance in amendment number 1. If that was what you wanted to do, if you wanted to have your voice be known in cutting Alzheimer's, in cutting epilepsy, in eliminating the smoking quit line, in reducing breast cancer, you could have voted for amendment number 1. This was an option. I saw no yes votes on that amendment. Here we are now looking at restoring these, and I think that the people who have children with epilepsy, the people who have children with autism, the people who have young children who need early intervention will be glad that we took the action to be sure that their needs are protected.
Back to Mr. Eunice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
Chairman Harris, just a couple of questions. First, I see on my calendar that there is a Human Services Appropriations Working Group for fiscal year 16 tomorrow. Is that still scheduled?
Yes, it is.
So if we're having a working group to discuss the fiscal year 16 budget, but we're running these amendments on the floor today, what's the purpose of all of the committee process?
I think there are about 1,090 other lines we have that still need consideration, and we can go through those.
I guess my point is, why not bring those on the floor if you're bringing these on the floor? How do you differentiate what's important enough to go through committee and why we have a committee process, and what's important enough to skip the legislative process and bring them straight to the floor? How are you determining that?
Because I think in both Springfield and Chicago, in public hearing after public hearing, both behind closed doors and in Human Service Appropriations hearings, we've heard over and over again from members of the public that taking care of our seniors, taking care of people with disabilities, addressing the needs of persons with mental illness and substance abuse disorder in our community.
Ladies and gentlemen, to the amendment, to the bill, this is a sham. It's an absolute sham. I am proud to be able to represent 110,000 constituents from my district. They have not had one chance to voice their opinion on this process. This is not what's taught in high school civics. This is not the legislative process. And everyone needs to know that the process is being ignored and that certain individuals are determining the game that is going on here and the politics that are being played both today and yesterday. We have a lot of work to do, and it's embarrassing that we're wasting our time on the games that we're seeing in the last couple of days.
Representative Ammons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the sponsor yield.
Sponsor yields.
Representative Harris, I wanted to make sure I understand. What you are doing in your amendments here for HB 4141, in essence, is restoring some line items that people can't live without. Can you explain that for me?
Yes, this is being sure that programs that we have funded in the past that people who are very vulnerable and at risk rely on, that they know that they will be able to go to bed tonight knowing that the state of Illinois is taking the steps to be sure that they and their families are protected.
To the bill and the amendment itself, I'm really moved by your willingness to step forward and move this amendment, House Bill 4141, for two reasons. In the so-called budget fix of 1415, many of our members of our community were suffering under that budget fix. We know that people cannot live without light heat services in our state, and we can't take our time through the budget process, through all of the committee hearings that we've already done, the 11 weeks of testimony that we've had, and not take care of some of these right now. I am concerned about other items that are not on this list, and I hope that you will certainly continue to work with us and work with our colleagues on the other side for the other 1,000 line items that we really do need to talk about going forward in the next few months. And I will certainly stand in support of this House amendment today. Thank you so much.
Representative Ives.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill. Everybody watching above should really pay attention to what's going on today. We had a first vote that basically asked us to vote against things that most people want to fund. And that was a sham. Now we have all these different amendments. They're strictly just there for mail pieces for a fall campaign. They're basically there to make sure that if we vote against them, that we don't like people with autism, or we don't want to help the homeless. And nothing could be further from the truth. My nephew's autistic. I mean, how dare you play around with autism budget in this manner? The truth is, you had $31 billion come in between 2011 and 2015, new revenue. Nearly all of it went to pension payments, which you refused to reform. When you have increased budgets and increased grant lines year after year after year with no way to pay for the spending, at some point there's a consequence to be paid for that. And unfortunately, we're paying the consequences now. We have to right-size our budget. We are still down 236,000 jobs from the Great Recession. We lost nearly 100,000 residents last year alone. We're going to lose 2,000 steel workers soon. We are also down, in March, we were down 1,800 payroll jobs alone. This is about right-sizing state government. There is no blank check. We are still over $6 billion that we owe in current accounts. But nobody wants to prioritize the budget. And that's unfortunately what we have to do. We have to prioritize what the state is responsible for. But the sponsor started out by talking about these are funding things that people value. Well, why wasn't that topic of the discussion last year when we funded $10 million for a DePaul stadium? When you found $10 million for a theater in Chicago? When you found $35 million for the speaker's school that didn't go through normal grant lines? How about when you decided to send $20 million extra to the Department of Labor and they didn't have to tell us what it was going to be used for? Were these things that the Democrats valued also and put into the budget? How about the Ileana Expressway, which national leaders in transportation have called a boondoggle? You still, in last year's budget, found funding for that. Is that also what you value versus the homeless and child care and autism? Is that what you value? Because if it's all about values, where were your values for the last decade when you were completely in charge? On top of it, Krista McCurry of the Chicago Tribune really said it well. You have to wonder why, and she writes this in an op-ed on April, where she says, you have to wonder why the rhetoric pillaring corporate handouts gets aimed at Rauner when it's the Democrats in this state who negotiated and sponsored every juicy corporate tax break for more than a decade. The legislator couldn't be bothered to pass a balanced budget in 2011, but it spent an entire fall session on tax breaks for CME Group and a generous campaign donor, Sears. So apparently that's what you value, corporate cronyism rather than the little guy. Enough of this. You know that this entire process is a fraud. On top of it, you are not being true about the things that you really value. The truth is what you have valued before in the votes that you put on last year. You created this crisis. We're going to fix it.
Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we're all adults here, and most of us are familiar with the history of this body voting against autism, voting against the light heat program, homeless youth. I can go on and on. Funeral and burial assistance, community care programs, teen reach programs. And guess what? Many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have voted no. Every year. Every single year, you've had a problem with helping people who simply need a helping hand themselves. Many of these people not only are in our districts as Democrats, but they're in your districts as well as Republicans, because they're our citizens as well. So let's be real with this. Yes, we're in a difficult financial state, but the fact of the matter is, most of us are not being honest and having real discussion and real sincere investment in some of our most vulnerable youth because we don't want to do nothing for new revenue. We sat here and allowed the temporary tax increase to dissolve. No one raised a iota of a concern, and we lost almost $6 billion. If you want some, you got to give some. You can't have it both ways. And by the way, stop trying to dog out Chicago. Chicago generates about 70% of the revenue in this state that pay for programs all across the state and in your district. So let's grow up, all of us, and start looking at the real numbers and the real people who need our help. No, we're not going to agree on everything, but most of us know damn well that we were going to vote no on restoring most of these particular programs. So it's time to put up or shut up. It's a new day, and people are dependent on all of us to do the right thing, not tomorrow, but today. So I'm going to challenge all of us to come up with some solutions and not just the moaning and groaning all the time about woe is them. We got to cut our way down to the bone so people can choose whether they're going to eat cat food or dog food or regular food. You're cutting all of some of our state's most precious programs. Why do we have to be so cold-hearted all the time? Show me a Republican vote in the last 4 years where they said yes to anything. So it's a new day, looking for some new energy and some new ideas. So I'm dependent on all of us to take the leadership role as we promised our constituents when we ran for office, when we talked about health care, when we talked about education, when we talked about social services being delivered, when we talked about autism, et cetera and so forth. People are dependent on our leadership. Are you going to be a leadership as well and vote no against some of these programs? Are you going to go on record and voting against people who are living, who need breast and cervical cancer? Are you going to vote no about people who are homeless? Are you going to vote no people who are in child assistance care program or teen reach program? Are you going to vote no on that? That looks good when we're trying to get back down here, doesn't it? No, it don't. So I'm depending on all of us to come strong or stay at home and vote yes on these amendments.
Mr. Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me just read something. You know, we can have these debates, and but sometimes it really gets tiresome. We use the same old cliches and shibboleths. If there's a bill we don't like, we tell everybody that they're going to go to hell if they vote for it. We need to stop that nonsense. I wasn't going to say anything, but somebody mentioned a project that was first developed, the fact that we needed this project, by Daniel Burnham. And he wasn't a friend of mine. He was somebody that lived an awful long time ago, but he talked about a road around Chicago. Now, let me tell you something about the Illiana Expressway. This is part of a press release that goes back to December 11th, 2014. Washington, D.C., the Federal Highway Administration signed the Illiana Corridor Tier 2 Record of Decision, marking the completion of the project's environmental planning phase. With the issuance of the Record of Decision, the Federal Highway Authority supports the transportation need for the project, approves the analysis of its environmental impacts, as well as any mitigation efforts, and concurs with the selected route alternative for the new 50-mile highway facility connecting Interstate 55 near Wilmington, Illinois, with Interstate 65 near Lowell, Indiana. And it goes on and on and on and on. Nobody gave us anything. This was something that was decades in development. We went through all of the processes, and we were awarded the start of the project. And not one dime of state money was spent. So if you're going to call it, then call it right. But this isn't a project that we said was necessary. This was a project that planning departments, local government, and the Federal Highway Authority said was needed. So let's get that straight. You can be against this budget or this amendment, but if you're going to use other projects, be sure you get your story straight.
Mr. Harris to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We've heard a lot today here about process that is internal to those of us who sit in this room in Springfield. And we might have our battles back and forth across the aisle, but at the end of the day, the folks back home are counting on us for outcomes. They're counting on us for outcomes. And I think a good outcome would be, in the case of this amendment, to be sure that those folks who are seniors who live in our communities have the ability to stay within their own homes, live independently, and do not have to fear that they would have to move out of the community, move into an institution, and that the state of Illinois would be doing right by them. I ask for an aye vote.
Those in favor of the gentleman's amendment will vote yes. Opposed, no. The voting is open. Have all voted who wish. Have all voted who wish. Have all voted who wish. Please record yourselves. Mr. Clerk, please take the record. On this question, there are 70 voting yes and 38 voting present, and the amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk.
Floor amendment number 3 is offered by Representative Greg Harris and has been approved for consideration.
Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment deals with the Department of Children and Family Services, and what it does simply is it restores to the budget proposed cuts to services for children who are 18 to 21 years old who are wards of the state. I would ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Sandak.
A few questions of the sponsor.
Sponsor will yield to you, sir.
Representative Harris, has the director of DCFS opined on your amendment number 3?
On this amendment, I have not heard from him today.
Have you inquired of him with respect to his budget and this amendment?
We heard very lengthy testimony from him in committee.
Come on, Greg, I asked the question. Did you
On
inquire him on this amendment?
I did not.
Thank you. Is there a reason why you wouldn't ask the point person, the director of the agency, their opinion on the budget being allocated for their department?
I would expect, that all of us involved in the process down here would be looking at each and every amendment also.
Well, that would be true if the director were looking at an amendment filed about an hour ago. Is that something the director is supposed to do?
I think the director has made it clear in his testimony that while he supports the governor's budget, he was hoping that we could find a way to provide for these young people who are, we are really their parents. So I think that would be his position. I respect that.
To the amendment, I have a good idea how these roll calls are going to go. I am just ask people before, on that side of the aisle, before they push the green button, if they really would like this process to ensue on a bill that they found important to them in their district. Would they want an item put on the floor about an hour or two and then vetted such that this is being vetted on the floor? Is that how they think their constituents want matters that are important to them held? Is that how the process should roll? This is late in the game, but it's still early in the budget game. For this process to roll out this way and then tomorrow have an appropriations hearing on other topics of the budget just calls the lie to this process. This is a sham. This is so unfortunate. Again, I'm going to ask my colleagues and those on the other side that feel the process is less than honest, because it is, to vote present.
Mr. Fortner.
Thank you, Speaker. To the amendment and to the amendments in general, particularly I wanted to address a comment that came up in the context of the previous amendment, but is applicable to this one as well. And the question came up as to when in the last 4 years did our side of the aisle support programs for child care, autism, mental health, and so many of these other vital programs that help the most needy in our state of Illinois. And the answer was, it did happen in the last 4 years, specifically 4 years ago this spring, as we were crafting the fiscal year 2012 budget. At that time, the two sides worked together. We all sat at the table. Though not every budget bill was unanimous, they were all with wide bipartisan support as we did the couple dozen bills that made the budget. Some were unanimous. Even Human Services appropriations that year passed with 83 votes, a clear bipartisan support for that. So there is a process that we have done not so far back in our past where we have responded, we have worked across the aisle to put together a budget that both sides could support, that deal with these issues. We don't have to have this process that piecemeals these amendments in a way that doesn't do the state the kind of service I know this body can do. Thank you.
Representative Belloc.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
So specifically, Representative, this is the program I referred to before, but I know that we all care a lot about this program because we spent a lot of time on it and we've been working on it. So I guess my question to you is, number one, what is the cost of this program? I think it's either 140 million or 207 million. Not sure.
94 million.
Oh, 94. Okay, thank you. I thought it was 100. I thought in committee we were talking 140. Anyways, so I guess what I brought up before was that we met with Director Sheldon. I just spoke with the people from DCFS yesterday. They said he has flown back out to Washington twice. So my question to you is, with regard to this, is that I would question if there was still a chance. That's why I wish that we would have this in the appropriate hearing rather than on the floor right now, because if there was a chance to get federal money for this program, Why would we go ahead and put GRF in it where education or some other important category may have to be cut because of us funding this with general revenue, when we may have had a chance within the next week or two before the final days of the budget to get some federal funding for it?
Representative, it's my understanding that the federal process would last far longer than the beginning of our next fiscal year, and certainly longer than the end of this session, even if we were to decide to go down that path. So, should we have a chance to come back and adjust this program, as well as mental health and substance abuse, and the others, I think we all agree we could look for additional federal funds for, there'd be an appropriate time to come do that. Right now, we're looking at how do we maintain the viability of services for these young people, in the immediate future moving forward.
I understand what you're coming from, but I guess for the 16 budget, if we could get commitment from the federal government to fund this program, and they think that this program should be funded even now as it stands, because the majority of these children were in work programs or were in school programs, and that is a federal law that they can get funded 100% if they are in those programs, or if they are in a medical program, of which a lot of them are in Medicaid. So my point is that I don't want to see another program such as education or something important when we could work on this and try to get that federal funding, and when it gets off the table now, along with everything else, it'll say it's funded and we're not going to work on that. And this is something that I think is imperative, that has to happen. We all agree that, and that I wish that we could still move forward right now, because we've seen other things happen before. 2 years ago, we went to one of our congressmen. We had waited a year for a waiver, and in a couple of weeks, they got us that waiver. So I guess I just am saying that I don't want to take something out of general revenue and see a cut in education or in something important in another category that we could possibly have gotten federal funding for. Thank you very much.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Please let the record show that Representative Moffitt is excused for the remainder of the day.
The record will reflect that. Thank you, sir. Representative Ammons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the sponsor yield.
Sponsor yield.
Just one question, Representative Harris. What was the starting point, meaning the starting dollar amount that you started with? How did you come to this dollar amount that you're asking for today?
To maintain the level of services that the state has continuously provided to these young people who are in our charge. So the starting number actually was the proposed budget number? Is that what you started with? It is the FY15 post-supplemental number.
It's the proposed supplemental budget. So you didn't create that number yourself. You just took the number that was given over the last 11 weeks and you worked around a way to try to not eliminate this program totally.
In the governor's proposed budget, this was the proposal. It was on amendment number 1. This program would have ceased to exist.
Okay.
In this amendment, we're saying we believe that taking care of these young people is something that should be a priority, and would say going forward we should continue to do it at the same level which we are currently doing it.
And just one final question for you. Appropriating this money as you have proposed it in this amendment does not preclude the state or the department from seeking federal resources as a match to this money. Is that correct?
No.
Thank you. To the bill, to the amendment that's before us, I certainly understand. I didn't have this information any sooner than our Republican colleagues did on today. But I do know that a few weeks ago, I did go and visit one of our transitional youth programs that depend on this revenue in Champaign, Illinois. And the children in the program are 18 to 21 years old, but they have many, many needs that preclude them from going out on their own. And I'm really concerned for those young people in my district that would have nowhere to go and in essence would be homeless if we did not appropriate this money. In this amendment, I'm asking that our Republican colleagues support those young people who in essence are a ward of the state and are in essence the children of this body, and we're responsible for them. We would ask that you vote yes on this amendment, not present, because we want those children to know that as we care for our own children in our own homes, we would also care for those who have been taken into custody at the behest of the state. And so we are responsible for these children and in essence responsible for allocating appropriately today the funds that will keep this program operational. And I ask for you all to support this with a yes vote.
Those in favor of the amendment will vote yes. Opposed, no. The voting is open. Have all voted a wish? Have all voted a wish? Have all voted a wish? Please take the record. On this question, there are 70 voting yes, 1 voting no, 41 voting present, and the amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk.
Floor amendment number 4 is offered by Representative Greg Harris and has been approved for consideration.
Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen. This amendment deals with the Child Care Assistance Program, and if you will recall, in the governor's introduced budget, there were cost reductions due to limiting, among other things, children to only 6 years old and younger being able to receive child care services. You know, after receiving a tremendous amount of public input and discussion, we've decided that it is probably better to continue to provide child care to all parents so that they may work and be sure that their kids are home alone or home with appropriate care. We also want to be sure that we are funding appropriate child care that helps kids learn and prepares them for education in their later life. So I would ask for your support on this amendment.
Mr. Sandak.
Thank you. A few questions of the sponsor.
Sponsor yields.
Greg, just similar to the last questions I asked, have you met with and talked with the director of the department about this amendment specifically?
Not this amendment.
Any reason why?
We are presenting it here. It is the purview today of us to consider this. We've met with the director and the department on numerous occasions on the topic and general funding levels. This seems to be appropriate.
But it's not unusual, and frankly, it's more typical to have the director of any department before your committee or other appropriation committees to interact and obviously have a dialogue on funding.
We've had actually a lot of dialogues, and I commend the director. I think he's doing an excellent job, and I think he's done an excellent job representing the governor's budget and their position. And now it's time for the legislature to perform its functions.
Well, typically that function comes out of a committee on a vote, and it's far more interactive with a secretary or director or department head. And with that, I would ask you, would you be willing to recommit and move your amendment back to committee so that the head of DHS and other directors can be far more interactive and far more involved in the process and actually hear what it is you seek to appropriate to their department?
I think we can move through this process. We are not at third reading yet, so there's ample time for discussion.
Well, it's going to be we're not at third reading, you're right, it's on an amendment, but you don't intend to commit this to the committee after second reading, do you?
It would be my comment that there will be plenty of time to discuss with directors and other interested parties after we've gone through our endeavors here on the floor today.
Well, I appreciate that, but I'd ask for an answer to my question. Is it your intention to move this to third reading and vote on it in total, or are you going to commit it to a committee after second reading?
My intention today is to move these amendments and see which succeed and which fail.
And then what, Greg? If it succeeds...
Then we will come to a conclusion on the next step.
All right, so you have no intention of putting this amendment into committee for a full vetting in front of the committee?
I have just said that my intention today is to discuss these on the floor to see which succeed and which fail and to move from there.
To the amendment, that was an interesting, artful dodge. I simply asked the sponsor what his intention is after this amendment clearly passes because the roll call has pretty much been set. So maybe these show votes are similar to what we did last session on pensions and guns. I don't know, but it's a waste of our time. Our time would be better spent in committee, fully vetting appropriation bills, frankly, after a revenue number had been set. This isn't, by the way, zero-based budgeting. This isn't top-down budgeting. This isn't bottom-up budgeting. This is a sham.
Representative Wallace.
Thank you. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
I rise today in support of amendment number 4. I just want to briefly share the difficulties that the cost of child care may have on our families in Illinois. At this point in time, child care assistance, or actually child care, costs the average resident of Illinois $12,568 per year. This is more than the cost of tuition at some of our state schools. Many of our working families rely upon child care assistance so that they can complete their educational goals, so that they can be active participants in the workforce, contribute to our economy. And we also know that there are outcomes for the students who participate in these early childhood programs. Children who participate in early childhood education are more likely to pursue post-secondary education, are more likely to go on to receive bachelor's and master's degrees. It is imperative that we keep funding for this particular program, and as the needs of our families and children continue to grow, we may have to revisit this from time to time. And as a personal note, I would not have completed my doctoral studies if it were not for child care assistance and child care subsidies. My son would not be performing above grade level in reading and math were it not for early childhood education. And so I just urge everyone in this chamber to recognize how very important child care subsidies are to the working families of this state, and to the working families that are contributing by and large to some of the very problems that we're seeking to solve. Again, I urge an aye vote, not a present vote. I do, again, want to emphasize the fact that none of us had this information any earlier than anybody else. But these issues need to be solved, and our constituents are calling upon us to do that. Thank you.
Mr. Demmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the amendment, this is a very important program, as previous speakers have mentioned. In fact, we all just really spent a lot of time hearing from constituents and hearing from people who are affected by the child care program as we debated the supplemental to the previous year. We also saw how much stress it put on parents and providers during the last fiscal year when we saw funding was running out and people didn't know where else they were going to go. I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Last year, we put ourselves in that situation of unnecessarily stressing so many parents and providers across the state because we didn't get the number right in the first budget proposal. I think it's very important that we get the number right in this budget proposal, and I think one of the ways we can ensure the number is correct is to make sure that this proposal, this amendment, has a thorough discussion, a thorough debate, and has time for both sides, for advocates, for the department, to get together and compare notes to make sure that those numbers are correct. So pursuant to House Rule 68, I make a motion to commit this House Floor Amendment 4 to the Human Service Appropriation Committee.
You're not up there fast enough.
Gentleman moves to commit this bill to committee, or this amendment to committee. Those in favor of the gentleman, this would take 60 votes. Those in favor of the gentleman's motion will vote yes. Opposed, no. The voting is open. Have all voted a wish? Have all voted a wish? Have all voted a wish? Please take the record. There are 43 voting yes, 70 voting no, and the motion fails. The chair recognizes Mr. Davidsmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
Chairman Harris, I chose to be on the Human Services Appropriation Committee because I understand the importance of what we do in there. Do you think what we do is important?
I think the work that and the services we provide to the state of Illinois are very important.
Do you think the work that we do in committee is important?
I think that we've done a lot of work. I think it's been very important. We've listened to testimony from literally hundreds of citizens, advocates, interested parties, and departments. So I think all of this is a very important part of the process.
Do you think this process, bringing these straight to the floor, not going through the committee, actually takes that committee process for granted? Does it take our committee for granted?
I don't think we could have gotten where we are today without having spent the time we did in committee understanding all the different impacts that various budget proposals would have had. So I think it was time well spent.
I would argue that the majority of us knew how important many of these programs are, and that we'd be exactly where we are today without those meetings. And I think that this process takes those committee meetings for granted. Last year, I recall, we were part of the budget process for a long time, and then about 2 weeks out from the budget deadline, Republicans were excluded from the process. Are we being excluded this early in the process?
I think that the meetings have, there was one meeting where the Republicans chose to not attend. Other than that, I think Republicans and Democrats have been in the meetings.
That is not true. We were actually excluded, and actually towards the end of the year, meetings were actually just canceled because you decided to go it alone.
Sorry, I'm referring to this year.
We can agree to disagree on last year and the prior year. We still have a Human Services Working Group Committee meeting tomorrow morning, correct?
Yes.
What is the topic of tomorrow's committee meeting?
There are still, as we say, several hundred, if not 1,000 lines that we need to consider.
Will we be talking about community care?
I think we'll wait and see what the outcome of today's votes are.
Will we be talking about 18 to 21 DCFS?
I think we'll wait and see what the outcome of today's votes are.
I think we all know what's going to happen on these votes. I'm not going to go through the list of all these different amendments, but I think we understand where we're at. At what level is this funded for next year?
$480 million, and we give the department maximum flexibility to manage that within their budget and their discretion.
And how did we come up with that number?
In working with a number of providers on what would be a successful maintenance level of funding to allow them to continue to provide services without interruption to families.
What committee meeting did we get that information from? Do you remember which day we heard that information, where we heard those numbers?
I don't remember which day. We had a number of meetings with child care providers.
I would say we never talked about numbers, so I would say this did not come out of the committee process whatsoever. I think that this is completely disingenuous, and what you said earlier about we had a chance to vote on that first amendment, now we have a chance to vote on this. We are being given an all or nothing version. We're not being able to actually add something to the conversation, so I think it's ridiculous. We can obviously see that you put a lot of thought into this, judging by how long it's been introduced and having to vote on it a few hours later. I hope that everyone in here really understands what's really going on. We are currently voting on amendments to a bill that will probably never be heard. We're voting on amendments to a bill, and this is just going to be something that lands in your mailbox. I would just ask that if we're going to play a new game every day on this House floor, I would just ask that I receive a copy of the new rules every day when we start the game. Thank you.
Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's sponsor yield.
Sponsor yield.
Representative, we're going to be going through a bunch of amendments, and I wanted to point out one comment that you made to a member on your side of the aisle, and I'm pretty sure I wrote it down correctly. In quotes, you said, "We are restoring cuts to programs. Many people will go to bed tonight knowing that their funding will be restored." Is that an accurate reflection of what you said to one of your members?
That very well could be.
So the funding in these bills is going to be restored. Is that correct?
That would be my hope. This is certainly that step.
And so the funding involved in these 15 amendments equals about a $948 million increase over what the governor has asked for. Is that accurate?
Less than that, several hundred million.
Well, according to the deck,
It is higher than what the governor asked for.
So you're asking for more money, which we don't have, which obviously brings up the question, how are you going to keep your promise of funding these cuts so these people can go bed tonight?
I would go back to the remarks I made at the very opening, Representative, in saying that we will have to cut in these areas. We'll have to cut in other areas, but we need to do it in a responsible way to cause the least harm to families, particularly those in vulnerable situations. And I think we're going to have to find new revenue.
You're going to have to find new revenue. You couldn't do it in the fall, so you passed the sham budget hoping that your governor would be reelected. You have 3 members on your side that have vowed not to raise new revenue. You only have 71. The math doesn't work. So how are you going to get new revenue if you're going to exclude this side of the aisle and go on to all of the little budget gimmicks you're going to do? So, you just want to keep leaving us out of the program?
No, we're not excluding anybody, Representative, and this is not a revenue bill. This is, a simple series of amendments regarding specific programs that are part of a much larger whole.
But, Representative, you just said that you've restored the funding when this passes. How are you going to restore the funding? How are you going to pay for this? If you're excluding us, you can't get it by the governor. So how are you going to keep that promise to those people that you just said you were going to restore their funding to?
I hope that the budget, when it finally passes and approved by the governor, will reflect these amounts.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, to the bill or the amendment or the many amendments, I know you all have your press releases ready to go, ready to say how we restored funding. When it doesn't happen, and we're here all summer, how are you going to take that back? Because that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to take it back because we're not here. This isn't going to happen. We all know it's not going to happen. It's fun. It's fun to talk about. It's fun to hoot and holler, and someone gets up and brings up the past that, we were excluded, so we didn't be part of it. I know it's a game. It's fun for your side of the aisle. The adults on this side are trying to do things correctly. You got a lot of adults on that side of the aisle, too. I'm not trying to be critical, but I'd like you to come to the table and everybody work on this stuff. This is getting ridiculous. Getting ridiculous. Ladies and gentlemen, we're better than this. I've said it before. I'm starting to wear my "we're better than this" speech out. But it happens all the time. It happens all the time, and this is another one. And we got, like 8 more of these to go. And we know it's going to be 70 to whatever it's going to be. And it's not going to solve a thing. And it's going to make our side separate even more when the people elected us to come together and do things correctly. And it's just not going to happen.
Those in favor of the amendment will vote yes. Opposed, no. The voting is open. Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Mr. Clerk, please take the record. On this question, there are 70 voting yes, none voting no, 39 voting present, and the amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk.
Floor amendment number 5 is offered by Representative Greg Harris and has been approved for consideration.
Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. This amendment funds early intervention services, which has long been part of the 0 through 3 project that has been so important to many families across the state, and would provide early intervention, detection, and therapy for children so that they will not have a developmental delay or would have a reduced developmental delay when they begin school, and therefore would have a much more successful life as they go through the school system and become adults. I would ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Sandak.
Thank you. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
Representative Harris, is this the same, less, or more than early intervention budgeted for 2015?
It is slightly less.
How much less is it than what 2015 was budgeted?
In this bill, it is $82,500,000. In the FY15 post-supplemental, it is $85,718,700.
So I couldn't hear the first number. So what's the difference, roughly?
It's about $3.2 million
less
lower
than supplemental 2015?
Right.
and why?
I think in recognition of the fact that we have all said that each and every program, as important as it is, we're going to have to cut and we're going to have to trim in order to make our budget balance. When we are talking about being fiscally responsible and having to make tough decisions, that means some things will have to be reduced. On the other hand, there are some things that were proposed to be totally eliminated, which are being fully restored. This is one of those that is partially reduced.
And which tough decision was made, the $3 million, give or take? Who made the tough decision to reduce it by $3 million, and what impacts will occur on the department for that tough decision?
We are hoping there will be very minimal impacts on the providers and the children, which is where we really need to focus our attention, that through different efficiencies in providing services, that they will be able to absorb these cuts.
What cuts? What's being cut? What $3
About
million?
$3.2 million.
I know, and what will that do? What will that do to the department's budget?
And again, we are leaving as much discretion. Rather than dictating this age, this developmental delay, we are giving the maximum opportunity to the providers in the department to run the program to the best of their professional ability as experts in this area to manage these cuts. And I think that's a good way for us to go, rather than you or I trying to determine how kids with developmental delays ought to be taught or given therapy.
I couldn't disagree with that. Of course, I thought this would be a great dialogue in front of one of those providers or some of the providers and the department, because that's what you do at committees. You have the actual dialogue as to what impacts, if any, rather than saying, well, I just hope they can absorb it and deal with it. That's the process that we typically do, and that's the problem with your process right now. You don't know what you don't know, and we're not. And while you may have had significant subject matter hearings, we're not having a subject matter hearing now. We're amending an appropriations bill without knowing a revenue number and without really knowing what the impacts are going to be. To the amendment, Mr. Speaker, I suspect some other of my colleagues will step up, but the game continues. We know the roll call. It's just a waste of time, energy, resources, and a darn shame.
Mr. Davidsmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
Generally, when we do the budget, we talk about not only the programs that the state provides, but administration of those programs. If we are keeping programs even or lowering them just a little bit, how are we going to be able to afford to administer these programs? Who is going to do that?
The overall department, are you referring to the department head count? Is that you're referring to, Representative? Yes. That is not addressed here. That is still something that we have yet to address as budget talks go forward.
So by funding these at higher levels and not including the actual administration of these programs, are we going to provide a disservice to these programs by not being able to administer them properly? Are we going to have to lower our head count to make up for the increase to the program?
These are, my understanding of these programs is they are privately contracted programs, Representative, and the supervisory head count of the department comes and goes, and these departments continue to provide their services.
So the state of Illinois doesn't have any staff that handles these programs?
I think they have staff that do grant oversight and grant processing and those kind of things that handle a number of programs, of which these might be included.
Okay, to the bill, or to the amendment. Once again, I just want to say this is a half thought out process. We're not really talking about funding and implementing these programs. We're just talking about one simple line item that's just trying to make a political point by the other side. Once again, all or nothing approach, very disingenuous, and I hope that everybody here understands what's really going on.
Representative Belloc.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Just wanted to go over the cost of this project, early interventions, which we know is an excellent program. Was that $82 million? 500,000?
82.5.
Okay, so again about the process. This was something that we brought up in just committee the other day, correct?
Early intervention has been discussed many, many times, because I think it's one of the, when you talk to families, you know, who are involved in this, if you remember in Chicago in the spring, we had one mom who had gotten out and gotten 13,000 petition signatures just herself to maintain early intervention after it had been in the governor's, you know, cuts earlier this year, which were later restored. So I think this is an incredibly important program to families. In the FY16 introduced budget, it was funded at only $64.6 million. So the level that we're proposing it at in this amendment is far in excess of that. And I think it recognizes its importance.
Thank you. And I certainly agree that all of us that are on the Human Service Appropriate Committee know how important this program is. In fact, years ago when I first came in, this program was having problem being funded, and we looked at it, and that's when we introduced a sliding scale so that we could continue to provide this program for people who could afford to pay for some of the services. So the other day, when we had quite a few people come in and testify to this representative, I thought when we left there, again, it's going back to the process. We were looking forward to bringing this subject back up in the working group to try to see how we could fund this at what we wanted to fund it at and not eliminate part of the eligibility, which I think was on the table as a question, wasn't that? The eligibility issue?
In this proposed amendment, we are not making any mention of the 30 to 50% developmental delay. We are taking that out. We're increasing the funding because we realize that after listening to those moms and dads come in, that the 30% that was in the introduced budget probably would have caused more hardship than any of us would have wanted.
Well, I guess that's my point, is that we thought that this program was very important, as we did autism and a lot of the other programs. But again, my point today on the floor right now is about the process of looking forward to going back into the working group so that we could try to look at some numbers in maybe some other line items, which we've done in the other years when we thought we could maybe lower some of the line items in some respect and keep the ones that we have. This way, my concerns are that you're going forward, putting everything back in, and that when it comes to the end, I don't know where we're going to have the funding for this. And again, I brought up before about the unpaid bills. They're not just out there. Those unpaid bills go to the providers, doctors, nursing homes, small business people. And my concern is that we need to pay our bills and get back on track. And we want to take care of the most vulnerable. And until we do something to correct that problem, there is still going to be the problem of those people not getting services that we need to serve. Thank you.
Those in favor of the amendment will vote yes. Opposed, no. The voting is open. Have all voted a wish? Have all voted a wish? Have all voted a wish? Mr. Clerk, please take the record. On this question, there are 70 voting yes, 42 voting present, and the amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk.
Floor amendment number 6 is offered by Representative Greg Harris and has been approved for consideration.
Mr. Harris.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this amendment deals with autism services. And if you recall, this amendment has, these services have certainly been a lot in the news recently when they were eliminated prior to Good Friday on World Autism Day by the governor, when they were restored just last week, I believe. The problem is that in the introduced budget for next year, these programs were zeroed out again. I think that a lot of us believe that autism services and programs are very important, that the families who have autistic kids really struggle and deserve our support. So we're proposing reinstituting those programs in next year's budget at a $4 million level. Again, it is about $300,000 less than the FY15 post-supplemental.
Mr. Sandak.
Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
I heard the beginning introduction. It's been a little loud here, Greg.
Yeah.
Repeat, what does 2015 have to do with This amendment right here?
I was saying that it had to do with the program. The program was, eliminated on World Autism Day, if you recall, by Governor Rauner. Later, it was restored when the governor got the COGFA report on revenues. In the governor's FY16 budget, this program was eliminated again, and this amendment would fund it for FY16 at a $4 million level. So I was just recounting the history of the ups and downs.
All right, because if we're going to recount history, I mean, we can go back 12 years, or we can go back to a bunch of budgets, including last year's 2015 budget that was entirely unbalanced, and we knew we would have problems post the election. So I just want to know, are we going to be doing the historical, or are we going to be looking at your amendments one by one as to what they try and do here and now?
I was just trying to go back a week.
Oh, all right. To the amendment, I'm going to go back more than a week. I'm going to go back a year, because this sham of a process ought to be instructive when we put things in its context. The sponsor talked about 2015. This House and our friends in the Senate had to take votes to fix a bad budget that only one side of the aisle put upon the people of the state of Illinois. And so when we revisit a week or two ago and try and buttress this process with whatever happened a week ago, let's look at what's really gone on for 12 years. 12 straight bad budgets, completely unbalanced, spending more than we have, and running bills like this. This is the kind of process we've grown accustomed to, and it's a shame. I thought with the new governor and the collegiality that was at least demonstrated on day one that we would be working together. This is not working together. This is ramming a bunch of brand new amendments to appropriation bills filed about an hour ago on a partisan basis down our throats so that some folks can champion back to their districts. Look what we've done. All we've done is waste time.
Representative Neckeritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the amendment, when we started this debate a few minutes a while ago, the representative from Wheaton indicated, and I think I'm quoting here, that we were playing games with autism. I ask you, who's playing games with autism? As the sponsor indicated, back in February, the governor zeroed out $4.3 million from the autism services line. $4.3 million he zeroed out. And next, on World Autism Day, he reduced the autism lines by $1 million. So again, I ask the body, who's playing games with autism? Vote aye.
Mr. Davidsmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
I just want to clarify something. In the governor's proposed budget, is he proposing to cut all autism line items, or is it just a specific program?
All GRF. For the autism program. Now there may be in DD
for TAP, the autism program.
The autism program.
But there are other line items that fund other programs for autism, correct?
There may be other programs where people could go, with DD or mental health issues that could impact autistic children. You are absolutely right.
Okay, that was just for clarification. Thank you.
Those in favor of the amendment will vote yes. Opposed, no. The voting is open. Have all voted a wish? Have all voted a wish? Have all voted a wish? Mr. Clerk, please take the record. On this question, there are 70 voting yes, 34 voting present, and the amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk.
Floor Amendment number 7 is offered by Representative Greg Harris.
Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. This particular amendment deals with addiction treatment grants, and it funds them at a level lower than the FY15 supplemental, but substantially higher than the FY16 introduced budget, and it is used to provide services and capacity to persons needing substance abuse treatment in community-based agencies across the state of Illinois. I would request an aye vote.
Mr. Demmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the amendments. Again, we've talked about quite a bit today about the importance of using the committee process that we've established to ensure that we have the best possible product going forward. That process gives us time. That process allows us to bring people who are affected by these programs in and discuss what the impact to them and to the services they provide, how they'd be impacted by the proposals we have before us today. I think it's very important that we use a committee process to achieve that. Therefore, in pursuant to Rule 68, I make a motion to commit floor amendment number 7 to the Human Service Appropriation Committee.
Gentleman moves a motion to recommit this amendment to committee. Those in favor of the gentleman's motion will vote yes. Opposed, no. The voting is open. Have all voted a wish? Have all voted a wish? Have all voted a wish? Mr. Clerk, please take the record. On this question, there are 42 voting yes, 68 voting no, and the motion fails. Those in favor of the amendment will vote yes. Opposed, no. The voting is open. Have all voted a wish? Have all voted a wish? Have all voted a wish? Mr. Clerk, please take the record. On this question, there are 69 voting yes, none voting no, 39 voting present, and the amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk.
Floor amendment number 8 is off by Representative Greg Harris.
Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. This amendment deals with the funeral and burial expenses for indigent persons in Illinois. So this would be people who would die in their own homes, whose family could not pay for a decent interment. It would also cover those, as we found out from testimony from the nursing home and hospital industries, those who die in a hospital or nursing home, so that that institution has funds available to it to respectfully take that person to their final rest. I would ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Sandak.
Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
Representative, same kind of questions as previous. Any communication with DHS with respect to floor amendment number 8?
I think in the governor's introduced budget that this line item had been eliminated, and it would have been the position of the department that they supported that.
Okay, I'll try it again. Have you had any communications with the director of DHS with respect to your floor amendment number 8?
No.
Thank you. What's the difference between the appropriation in floor amendment number 8 with the 2015 budget?
In the pre-supplemental budget, it was $9.485 million. In the post-supplemental budget, it was $9.2716. And in this amendment before us today, it is an even $9 million. So it is a cut on top of a cut.
It's a cut of how much net from 2015?
That would be $485,000 from the FY15 pre-supplemental.
Thank you.
And that one was all zeros. I could do that math in my head.
And it was well done at that. Thank you. And with respect to the $400,000 reduction, do we know which services and or what impacts the reductions will have with respect to the delivery of services?
This has always been a line item that we budget for, and I'm trying to think of an easy way. It is demand-based. We try to provide adequate appropriation to cover all the needs. Historically, this looks like it should be adequate.
All right, well, it's $400,000 less than last year, so is there some reason you think demand will be less and require less services?
Again, we can only look at, you can't predict the future on an item like this. You can do your best to look at past experience, and also realizing, as I've said before, we understand that on each and every line, we're going to have to think, can we cut this? Is it part of our job to find cuts, even though they may be difficult? But I would say funding it at $9 million is much better than providing zero funding.
All right, thank you. To the amendment, and Mr. Speaker, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I get it. We want to go play softball and go do other things. And maybe this isn't that important because, in essence, there's a little bit of pro forma going on. The sponsor delivers an amendment, and we pretty much know the roll call because, well, none of this really matters except for purposes of outside mailing and trying to play gotcha politics. I'll remind my colleagues here that appropriations matter, that good budgeting is actually one of the most important things that we do, and none of this is good budgeting. Not any of this exercise has been instructional in moving the needle forward. We're going to be right back at it, folks. We're going to be right back at it, and hopefully we'll be at it in committee, and hopefully there'll be some notion of bipartisanship. For the life of me, I don't know why, after this exercise, the notion of a working group, committee hearings, and actual communication between our side of the aisle and the folks that are doing the continuing damage here makes any sense. But I'm hoping some sense and sensibility will eventually occur, and that we'll get back to doing the people's business in a responsible manner.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Please excuse Representative Charlie Meyer for the duration.
Thank you, sir. The record will reflect that. Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Due to a potential conflict, I'll be voting present.
Thank you, sir. Those in favor of the amendment will vote yes. Opposed, no. The voting is open. Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Please take the record. On this question, there are 70 voting yes, 42 voting present, and the amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk.
Floor amendment number 9 is offered by Representative Greg Harris and has been approved for consideration.
Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. Floor amendment number 9 deals with issues surrounding the sadly growing homeless population in the state of Illinois. It provides funding for homelessness prevention initiatives, and it also restores funding for services to homeless youth, which were substantially reduced in the governor's introduced budget. I think these are very important and worthwhile programs. I would ask for an aye vote.
Those in favor? Saved by Mr. Sandak. Mr. Sandak is recognized.
Thank you. A few questions to the sponsor.
Sir, yields.
Representative Harris, you said this is an important appropriation. I think every one of these line items, every one of these amendments, every topic you brought up is important.
I think I said so too.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I think these kind of items that are very important to human beings, that affect the citizens of Illinois, deserve the most important type of calm, deliberative, and actual good process.
And I've been trying to be calm and deliberative, Representative.
Yeah, well, today you are, and that's great, except this isn't good process. This isn't open, transparent. This is nonsense. A really good process would be a committee hearing where the directors and the providers and those affected are actually in the same room. And yes, we have a committee vote and a recommendation of due pass to the whole floor. That's how it's usually done. That's how we've done it in the past. I think this is important. I think we're not giving it the importance it deserves. To the amendment again, I'm disappointed that we continue to play this game. Unfortunately, we're required to continue to vote present because we're here to do the people's work. We're just not being given an opportunity.
Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will sponsor yield.
Sponsor yields.
There's a word called deja vu. It's almost like we're reliving what happened about a year ago now. You guys passed a budget that clearly, by all definitions, was not funded. And we had to come in and fix that in FY15, and we're trying to move forward to 16. But deja vu comes in because here we are again. You have another budget that, once again, you said you hope there will be revenue. Your side of the aisle won't pass it on their own, so you need to work with us, but you're trying to ram this down our throat once again. Deja vu. Is this what's going to happen the entire session now, Representative? Are we going to have more of these appropriation budgets like this?
I think what we have before us are these, 16 items that account for about $2.6 billion out of a, $32 billion budget. So to say that it is not funded, this is funded. This is what's before us today. I think that there are ongoing discussions in multiple venues, some which all the members are privy to, others which only some of us are in, talking about issues such as the local government distributive fund and group health. So there are a lot of moving pieces. Also, Medicaid, which is one of our single largest expense. So together, we're going to have to come together as we always do on a complete budget.
So Greg, I consider you my friend. Do you think today is going to help with that process or hurt that process? Honestly.
I think time will tell.
Time will tell. That's nice. Deja vu, ladies and gentlemen. That's what we're looking at. That's what we've been looking at for a long time. You guys funded a budget last year that you had no intention of ever fully implementing because it just didn't have the money. You didn't have the money, and you can't pass a vote. You got 71 members. You can run this place. You're trying to right now, but you can't fund it. Just like you couldn't fund last year's budget, and that's why we had to help bail you out of last year's budget. And so we're going to try and pass this. This will not become law. It won't. But you'll get your press pop, you'll have a lot of fun, and maybe you'll tell those people that they can sleep at night, but they can't, because we're right back to where we were. If anything, we've made it worse today, because you're trying to break the cooperation that we've been trying to build. And that's what happened today. You broke that. You guys, through your leader, broke cooperation and goodwill that people have been trying to do. I can't speak for everybody, but I'm fairly certain that's what, in essence, is what's being thought of right now.
Mr. Batnick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
I just want to, I'm a freshman. I'm new learning all this. I just want to understand the process of what we're doing here. You're, on an hour's notice, you're asking us to vote on $2.6 billion worth of funding.
And for those who have been in our appropriation committee, I don't know which ones you serve on. These are topics which we've been discussing since the governor introduced his proposed budget some months ago.
Well, I understand that those are topics for your committee, which it seems like that's why it would make sense for the people that are in that committee to vote on it. I'm not in that committee, and you're asking me, a freshman, to vote on $2.6 billion worth of spending with an hour's notice. Is that not correct?
I think, all of us end up voting on the entire budget and all the revenue sources and the pension and local government distributive. That is what we're called upon to do when we come here.
I understand that. I'm hoping to have more than an hour to review the budget. So I'm asking, is it correct that you've given us about an hour to review $2.6 billion worth of spending?
I don't know. I think several hours have passed now, and as we get closer to May 31st, the one thing we'll find, all of us who have been here, that as the clock ticks closer to May 31st, any number of issues come upon us very quickly, and we're all called upon, to look at these items and evaluate them very, very rapidly.
I'd actually like to address the gallery here, because you're saying this is open, transparent. I'd like the people in the gallery to raise their hand to let me know if they think voting for $2.6 billion of spending with an hour or 2 hours notice is a good idea. Please raise your hand in the gallery if you think that's a good idea. You know what? There's room on the other side of the aisle for you. Welcome to the Illinois legislature. One person. The reason... The reason I rose and I wanted to speak earlier, this is sad. I'm disappointed as a freshman because I've tried whenever I could to find solutions to the issues that we face in this state, ways to provide better services, maybe more efficiently. There's a million articles about the waste in this state. And here we're just being thrown $2.6 billion worth of spending with an hour to review it. I mean, it almost brought me to tears when I find out that this is the way the state operates. The reason I rose, you mentioned about the growing homeless population. The reason things are bad in this state is because this is the way we've been operating as a state the last decade or so. And maybe if we improve the way we operate together in a bipartisan way, we'd have better solutions. Maybe we would have less homeless. Maybe we would have more people working. Maybe we wouldn't have so many jobs leaving the state. This is not the way a functioning state operates. Thank you.
Those in favor of the amendment will vote yes. Opposed, no. The voting is open. Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Please take the record. On this question, there are 70 voting yes, 41 voting present, and the amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk, the gentleman takes the bill from the record. Mr. Clerk, agreed resolutions.
Agreed resolutions. House Resolution 446, offered by Representative Welch, and House Resolution 447, offered by Representative Ives.
Leader Curry moves for the adoption of the agreed resolutions. Those in favor say yes. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The agreed resolutions are adopted. Mr. Clerk, the adjournment resolution.
House Joint Resolution 73, offered by Representative Curry, be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the 99th General Assembly of the State of Illinois, the Senate concurring herein, that when the two houses adjourn on Thursday, May 7, 2015, the House of Representatives stands adjourned until Tuesday, May 12, 2015 at 12 o'clock noon, or until a call of Speaker, and the Senate stands adjourned until Tuesday, May 12, 2015, or until a call of the President.
Leader Curry moves for the adoption of the adjournment resolution. Those in favor say yes, opposed no. The ayes have it, and the adjournment resolution is adopted. Ladies and gentlemen, please pay attention to the clerk for committee announcements.
The following committees will meet immediately upon adjournment. The Elementary and Secondary Education, School Curriculum and Policies Committee will meet in room 114. The Transportation Vehicle Safety Committee will meet in room C1. The Healthcare Licenses Committee will meet in room 122. The Elementary and Secondary Education Charter School Committee will meet in room D1. The Educational Task Force Committee will meet in room 118, and the Energy Committee will meet in room 413.
Chair recognizes Mr. Crespo for an announcement.
Thank you, Speaker. So I make an announcement that the General Services Appropriation Committee scheduled for today, the meeting will be canceled.
The chair recognizes Mr. Franks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We'd like to cancel the Committee on State Government Administration tomorrow.
Chair recognizes Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Purposes of announcement, tomorrow at 8:30 a.m., we will have the Appropriations for Higher Education. We'll have a working group at 8:30 a.m. in room 100 to discuss the state's higher education budget.
Mr. D'Amico.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to remind everyone about the House-Senate softball game later on tonight. Try and get out to Lincoln Park. Should start about 5:30, 5:45, and hopefully we'll bring the trophy back home. Thank you.
Representative Lilly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Announcement as well. Even though we have canceled Friday, we will be having rehearsal for Cal on Thursday right after session. We want to be at our best. Please, those of you who can stay for rehearsal, we look forward to seeing you at the Stratton on the 3rd floor. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Mr. Arroyo for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Public Safety Appropriation will be meeting in room 100 for some brief comments, an overview of two agencies right immediate after session.
Thank you, Mr. Arroyo. Reminder to members, I'm sure you all remember this, Friday's session is canceled. And now, leaving perfunctory time for the clerk, Leader Curry moves that the House stand adjourned until Thursday, May 7th at the hour of 1 p.m. Those in favor say yes, opposed no. The ayes have it. And the House stands adjourned until Thursday, May 7th at the hour of 1 p.m.
House Perfunctory session will come to order. Introduction, first reading of Senate bills. Senate Bill 936, offered by Representative Martino, bill for necessary local government. Senate Bill 1344, offered by Representative Beiser, bill for necessary civil law. First reading of these Senate bills.